what we did last time is we looked at the maybe it's a consonant tone, and he gives us these few rules of what to look out for in order to do in-depth learning. In other words, to read things on a surface level, you could just read words after words and then more or less in a fuzzy way try to understand what's being said or look at Rashi here and there. But he wants to open up the depth of learning. So to do that, he has to teach us, he taught us some very basic rules. The first one being that the physical words on the page are being used very precisely. It's really a scientific or mathematical use of language, or you want to say contract law, whatever the analogy you want to do, but the language here is very, very purposefully set. And he gave us the general, so he says the first thing you have to do is be aware of that, and if you're going to understand the deeper meaning of what's going on, you're going to have to realize that the words are very consciously set, and therefore anything that might seem extra or repetitious or any unusual change or any change from one subject to the next subject has to be analyzed very carefully. And once you start asking yourself those questions, i.e., are there any extra words or repetition of concepts, and is there any lack of consistency, once you ask those questions, then the text will start opening up, because it's written in such a way that these things are encoded into the text itself. They're put there purposely so that the depth of the information can be understood. Okay, and that's a very big chiddush, because people don't understand that. The Chazon Ish says that people think they're reading a newspaper, for instance, or where you're just reading information, but there's nothing more than what's being said in the words. And the difficulty in learning is that the words are guideposts to a deeper matrix of cases and understanding. And if you're not aware of that, so you just read it from and go on to the next thing, and you really didn't get the true message. Okay, so basically, just to recap, there's two basic aspects of language that we have to be aware of. One is the physical words, and two are the concepts. Okay, both of those we're going to have to key on in order to understand the text clearly. Now, in language, and that's what he calls lashon and iyun, which is the language that's being used, the physical words, and the message or the content that's the language is expressing. And he said in both those areas you have to look for things which are extraneous. In the physical language, if something was said in 3 words, then and you could have said it in 2 words, then that extra word is coming to teach you some other information. And in concept, if the concept is repeated, even if it's different words, but you say, look, it can't be that the same concept is repeated again, even if it's a different language, if it means the same thing. So therefore, another flag goes up, and you say, well, what really is the deeper meaning of the second statement? Okay, conceptually. Then he gave this very important rule, which again, these things are missed by many people, and it's the concept of chiddush. That this is we're only going to tell you things that you wouldn't know. So if you read the Chumash, for instance, or you know something just because of natural common sense, then it doesn't have to be written here. What's written here is a book called chidushim, things that you would have thought differently. Okay, and so because of that, he's going to always have us investigate what you would have thought and contrast that with what is written here. Again, missed by many people. They just think whatever's written That's all it is, but it's not. What's written is to say this and not something else, or not another alternative, and that's the chiddush. The chiddush here is you would have thought something else, and the answer is there's a new way of thinking. Okay, that's the idea of chiddush. Now, the second thing we have to do is, third actually, is to make sure that we have consistency. Okay, since we're dealing with intelligent people, so they're not going to be inconsistent. When we see something inconsistent, we know that they're telegraphing another message. Okay, so that means that, for instance, we had in our text, you can't call something maver and then next line call it aish and mean the same thing without purposely doing that and wanting to broadcast another message. Okay, so whenever we see any inconsistency in the physical language, like a change in language, or in an improper change of subject matter, things are going A, B, C, D. If they go A, D, F, E, like we said, the order of this Mishnah doesn't seem to have a consistent flow from the short of B'mam and the Hever. So then you have to say, well, why was that done? Okay, because again, we presume that an intelligent person will present his information in the proper seder, in the proper order of things. And when the order is confused, so we say, wait a minute, we're not dealing with confused people here, so there must be, again, a reason for that change. Okay. Then this last move he said, which is a very, very, very difficult move, is to discover the source of the halacha in the Chumash, okay? Or it could be Rabbanan, so you have to be careful. When the Mishnah talks, is it telling us a Torah law? If it is, which specific verse in the Torah is it coming from? Or verses, if it's coming from more than one. And the second thing you have to know, it could be a rabbinic ordinance, and that always has to be clear what level of chiddush the Mishnah is talking about, the Raisa or the Rabbanan. And you also have to know, which is also very difficult, the factors involved. When you see a law is a result of a certain case. The problem is, what was it in this case that produced that law? What was the factor? What was the, and we always say, my timer, what was the reason that the law turned out that way? Okay? So that also, all these things have to be done in order to get a clear understanding of the Mishnah. And that's a lot of work, not so simple. So what we did here, the next stage here, is we started looking at this Mishnah. And just you applied these principles, and we saw, for instance, that there was a lot of things that there was no chiddush. To say arba, there's no chiddush, we said, because you could have counted. Avos, well, that was just a question of what is the chiddush of an av. I mean, so we had to define it first. That's a question of definition. Does it mean, is it a propagative text? In other words, is this specific law in the Chumash go further to produce toldos and not? Or does it just mean that that's the source? Okay, we spoke about that. Nezikin is an improper use of language, because the grammatical form should be mazikin. Then it came to questions of order. We said shorbo, mav, and hever. There's, of course, a machlokas on them. That's another thing you always have to do. My charusa, Zavi Grima, very nice. He claimed that the Gemara, the first thing the Gemara does is clear up, likes to do anyways, to clear up language problems. In this question, really, the Gemara is going to talk about the avos. I don't know if exactly that's a language problem, but it does definitely have to discuss this word mava, because it's just an unclear word in Hebrew, and there's a big machlokus about it, whether it's man or does it mean shame. So now that machlokus, of course, is going to have a lot of ramifications on how we learn the four. Okay, but we won't get into that. That's something that we're going to have to be studying. The hever is also an unusual word, we said, and we're going to associate that through even a process of elimination with fire. And then the question was, why did it switch from the word hever to eish? Just say shor, bor, mava, and eish. So I think I brought to you last time that one of the Rishonim say that really Rashi is going to tell us that the Torah starts with shor and bor, but those also rhyme. So if it would have said, for instance, Adam and Regel, it wouldn't rhyme. And one of the agendas here of the Mishnah, by the way, was supposed to be Torah Shabbat Peh. One of the agendas of the Mishnah is to get it into the head, and that you'll remember it, and you won't forget it. So it also uses at times things which may not be formally correct, but in order to make sure that this Mishnah gets carried down to the generations accurately, so there may be mnemonic systems or like this used in order to make sure that the information gets carried forward and not confused by a gnashing of the teeth, we'll say, of using different words. So that's what he says. Now, we got to this next phrase. So there was a lot of problems here. And by the way, all these problems that Rishonim talk about, there's nothing here really that is unseen. Anyone who's a professional person who's learning and sensitive to what's going on is going to see these problems immediately, and that's what they talk about. That's the topic of discussion. So when it came to this middle phrase, which starts telling us the differences between these four avos. Okay, so we see inconsistencies. For instance, here it says the shor like the mav, and the mav is not like the shor. But in other words, it does the statement, and I think that's called the converse. And yet on the other ones, it doesn't do that. So the question is, how come? Also, we notice that the factor which defines the difference between shor and mava is not stated, whereas when we start doing multiples of 2, all of a sudden the Mishnah does state the critical difference between the two. So why is that happening? Okay, right. And that was, the second phrase. Those are the problems we raised. Then the last phrase here is very interesting because all of a sudden we switch from the differences between the four avos and we look for the common denominators. Okay, so what's going on here? Why do we have to know that there's differences in common denominators? Either they're different and they're unique, or they're equivalent and I could just learn one from the other. Where do I get this combination of difference and similarity? It should really be, if they're similar, just give me one and I'll know all the other ones. If they're different, then they don't need to have a common quality. They should all be different. So that's again, we'll open up to a very deep discussion, but basically just, very generally, the problem here we said was that if at first glance, all these four things are equivalent. Therefore, it is a repetition of iyun, of concept, in Chumash itself. Even though they're different words, one is talking about an ox and a pit, but conceptually they're just telling you that you have to pay when you have a dangerous item that you didn't watch and you destroyed someone's property. So if that's the case, if that's the common quality called dark and lahazik, ushmir and olecha, so then why do I need all four of them? So the chiddush here of having all four is theoretically you might have learned one from the other, but since there is another factor which you could have made a significant difference between one that was written and the other three that were not, so the Torah had to write them. So we said that's another one of the important rules. I have to get I have to go through with you with another section in this book, which is how to understand the system of the interaction between what's called common sense and the Torah's writing. The Torah is never going to repeat common sense. That would be a repetition of concept. When it does, so we have to understand there are certain exceptions to that rule, and that creates a new rule for us. But I'm not going to get into that. Those are all very important things which, as we do the learning, I'm going to bring up. And again, these are things that a normal person who's just learning and reading through text would I don't think would ever discover. But since the Yegbis and Kamton was mamash a real gaon in learning, he's going to give us again these short lists of rules that when you see them, then you begin to understand how the mechanism of the Torah works. Okay, so basically we could say that if I had one, I could really theoretically have learned all the other ones because they have the same LCD of Darker Lahas and Shmiras and Alecha. So the Mishnah has to tell us, however, you might have thought that there's a critical difference. One has a chumrah that the other three wouldn't have, and therefore if I only had one, I wouldn't have known the other three. And even if I had two, I wouldn't have known the other two. Okay? So because of that, the possible misreading of the text, the Kodesh Baruch Hu has to spell things out, which is a very wonderful thing. Again, the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants us to get the right message, and if the message will contain within itself a doubt, then the Kodesh Baruch Hu wants to clarify that. Okay, so even that's again I'm only giving you like a surface of these are very, very very interesting pieces that people really spend a lot of time talking about. But Baruch Hashem. Okay. Oh, yeah.
I think
please.
one of the things that we actually ended up spending a whole lot of time on was the Lohari Ashor Kahari Hamava and Lohari Hamava Kahari Ashor was trying to understand how Shmuel could say this or explain this and how Rav could explain it, and kind of got bogged down in this third Tosfos here, Lohari Ashur Kahari Amave, about understanding. So that's would be of interest to me to.
No problem. We can vade go there. That's wherever your interest goes. Those are very, very important. Tosfos is very. You have to know a little more about what's going on. Tosfos is talking with a lot of, with all of them are simultaneously. So he's dealing with a full knowledge of all the givens and talking about how they interact. So sometimes it's very hard to understand Tosfos because you're just starting and you just only have the givens that are in front of you and you don't understand the interactions that are going on in other places. Like, for instance, this type of limud is something that you have to really, learn. This idea of kal v'chomers and how they work and beseda, but we'll go into it, bli neder. But before I do that, what I would like to do with you, because before you go into here, I sent you this. I hope you have it. Here I sort of wrote a summarization of the problems that we've been discussing. Okay, I took each one of the. I hope I say this. I took each one of these statements and I wrote out what rules do they violate such that we're going to have to now understand the deeper level of the discussion. Okay. Let's now go to this piece because I'd like to give you some basic principles, and I really see that they open up the clarity of thought, and if you don't have them, then you accept your own fuzzy thinking, okay, which basically that's what people do. I make a thing like, I make an analogy to sculpture. You have this rough piece of clay, and you keep going over it and over it and redefining and the bumps and the turns until it creates a figure. So that's what people do. The problem is that it's a hit and miss type of activity. how much can you do, how many hours do you learn, what type of conclusions do you have, what type of skills do you have. So when you have these short lists written by great Gaonim or masters of the material, they really help you in your clarity of understanding what is going on. Okay, so here is a very little, again, he writes very shortly, but it's filled with very powerful and important information. He tells us how Rashi works in his commentary. Okay, and he tells us there's 5 things that you have to key on in Rashi, and then we're going to go into Rashi and we're going to look at them, and then so we'll be understanding the process abstractly and then doing it on hands. That's what I like to do. So you actually see you see that the abstraction is really doing something. It's not just an abstraction and you leave it at that. So let's see what's here. He says, Minhag Rashi Zal, Shitaso, his custom and his way of commenting. He is again at the level of the mission in the sense that he is not going to say any single word unless it's absolutely necessary. So someone wrote a book here recently, he called it What's Bothering Rashi? Okay, because if there's no problem, there's no reason for Rashi to speak. So there always has to be some issue that Rashi has to be addressing. Now, what are they? Okay, and he says it's even one word, and that's we're doing this piece, and it's the Rashbam writes on Baba Basra. The Rashbam is his grandson, and he cannot. Anyone who reads him realizes he cannot reach the level of preciseness that that Rashi does. Although he does a wonderful job, don't get me wrong, we're talking about a tremendous Rishon, but Rashi has this ability to conserve his language in such a way that he says a little and means a lot. So you have, that's a very unique. He's the king of really the king of the commentaries, I believe. Okay, so now what does it mean? Rotz Lamar, ki kasher yedaber davar al lashon hagamara hu. Now he's going to give us a list. When Rashi talks about the Gemara, he has these five things that are going to force him to comment. What are they? O leperish bavor kihu sasam. The first one is he has to explain something because it is obscure. It's hidden. For instance, the word mavo, what does it mean? Okay, so when a concept is something that's totally unknown, so he has to talk, or else you won't be able to even understand what's going on in the statement. As I said, once you define your terms, then you can start talking about what factors are operating, but if you don't understand your terms, then there's nothing to really talk about. So that's the first thing he does. Things which are satum, which are closed, where you don't have any idea what the physical word means at all, the language means at all, so he has to explain it. The second thing is, O lihios nishmar mi perish. Oh, I'm sorry. I had to switch my office, and I'm using this desk, which is, that's okay. Hold on one second. My mouse just fell on the floor. It's okay, not a problem. Okay, I don't think there was too much damage. There we go. Okay, so the second thing is he has to mufarish because to be nishmar mi perish acher muteh, which means if he does not tell you what the meaning is of the statement, then you will get the wrong idea. Okay, so for instance, it says in the Torah, Hashem put his hand in Mitzrayim. Well, I don't know if Rashi comments there, but someone has to tell you, so you have to know Hashem doesn't have a hand, and therefore this is a metaphor. Okay, so he always has to, he has to comment when your simple common sense understanding of the language would lead you to explain the text in an improper way. So in order to eliminate that possibility, he has to say his perish. Okay, that's called Nishma mi peresh acher. Okay. Now, next thing. He has to explain the text to also make sure that, put it this way, to solve a certain difficulty or an attack. In other words, when you read this text seems to contradict another text. Okay? So if it does, so then he has to say to you, I know you read this other Mishnah and it looks like there's something else happening here. For instance, here it says Meitav Haaretz. Well, we know there's a brisa that says you can also pay with kesef. Well, you don't know that, but there's a brisa that says you can pay for damages with kesef and shabbat kesef. So our Mishnah says you can only pay with Meitav Haaretz. I mean, that's what it says. It doesn't say anything about kesef and shabbat kesef, right? So you'll have a kasha because there's a brisa that says kesef and shabbat kesef, and our Mishnah says Meitav Haaretz. That's a contradiction. So Rashi has to say, relax. What it means here is if you pay with money, pay with land, then you have to pay with the best. Okay? So he's mitaretz akusha for you. He's already, even though you may not be sensitive to it, but that's what he's doing. What he's doing is explaining a seeming contradiction that you may have if you have a broader understanding of the text in front of you. Okay. Now that could also be internal contradictions. If he sees an internal contradiction, he may see it. But anytime that there's a contradiction between what's in front of you and some other text in Rashi, that represents a kasha. So he has to solve that. Tosfos, the way Tosfos does it, if you notice, is he says im tomer ish lomar. He says, and if you will say that there's this contradiction, then I'll solve it for you by this resolution. That's the style that Tosfos uses to introduce his kashas and terutzim. Okay. Now another thing that Rashi will do is comment to explain some language which has to be let's say it has to be explained in an unusual way, not the simple way. Okay, that's called dachuk. Sometimes the text says what it says, but the simple meaning of the text is not the real meaning of the text. You have to use a secondary meaning of the word. Okay, like this word avos, for instance. If someone would think that it means it means a biological av, okay, which it maybe, I'm not saying that's such a good havamina, but let's say you would have that. He has to tell you no, it's really not being used in that sense. Or better, you might think that that the simple meaning of avos is that it's generative. We're going to see Rashi's going to say it means that those things which are written in the Torah. Well, that's the hook to say. I mean, normally an av, as the Gemara is going to say, if it's a tolda, usually it's a sign of a generative principle, that what you're seeing here is not a unique case, but a case that will produce other cases from it. Yet Rashi does not use that definition. He uses another definition, which is av means it has a source in the Abba, which is a source in the Torah. Okay, so that's a dohuk. That's not what you simply would have said the words mean. It can mean that. No one's saying no. I mean, it couldn't. He's not going to say something that it cannot not mean. But he is giving you what's called a perish dohuk, and you have to say why. You see, there's a reason why he wants you not to say the simple meaning and to use this perish dachuk, which is a secondary meaning of the text. Okay, so that's another thing that Rashi will do. The fifth thing that Rashi will do here is called mitaken lashon. So although he doesn't do it here, but the word I said in this Mishnah says ukesha hezek chav hamaz. Proper grammar is chayav. Okay, so if he can just although he doesn't do that here, the Gemara does get into it, but he fixes up a seeming difficulty in language. It's called mitaken lashon. Or, for instance, we said nezikin, although Rashi doesn't talk about the Ran does, why it doesn't say mazikin. So the text is not being used, as we said, in the correct formal way. And he's not really trying to say that there's another meaning of the text. He's just trying to explain what it simply does mean. Okay, because the language is not being used in a strictly formal way. That's called matakan lashon. Okay, so he gave, again, and I'm giving you the short list. He goes through these things later in Darkei Gemara, and what I'm going to try to do is introduce them more organically than going from the beginning to the end of the book. I mean, although I have it on the site, I went from the beginning to the end, but I don't want to get so far away from the learning itself that we end up just studying the theory. So I'm just going to bring these svarim in little chunks and then apply them, okay? And then we'll go further. Now, here's Rashi on our Mishnah, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, I did bring it here. I'm sorry. Look at that. I actually did bring it here. 1 second. Yeah, this is the second part of, I actually did bring it here, okay, but I brought it together. Let's go into the Mishnah first, okay, instead of spilling it here, because this is stuff that I worked on and I spelled it out, and I don't want to just give a whole lecture. Let's look at Rashi himself, okay, without my introduction there. And here's Rashi. Yeah, here's Rashi, okay? So I want to start reading a little, and let's see if we can see what Rashi is, what's Rashi, okay, what's bothering Rashi, so to speak, that he has to comment. What's his purpose here? Okay, so this is Rashi. So I'm putting you on the floor there, okay?
Oh, all right. So Arba avos nezikin, avos kari lahanik dixivan bekra behedya. So these the avos that are avos that are mentioned here are the ones that are dixivan bekra behedya. They're written in the Torah explicitly. So, in other words, I guess what we learned, Gemara Meforish Hainihu Toldos, and the Gemara explains what their Toldos are. So, I guess from this we would understand that there's other avos besides these, but these ones here are given instead of the other ones because the other ones are not mentioned explicitly in the Chumash.
Well, that's an interesting theory that you just proposed, okay? You're saying that there's two types of avos. There's avos that are written in the pasuk, and there's avos that are not written in the pasuk, right?
Right.
I'm going to break this into two parts because there are two different points here, okay? Rashi has two different problems in one of these things. Okay, the second one is about the Tolos, but the first one is about the avos. So he says, avos kori lahanach. These are called avos. Why? The kasivan bekro behedya, because they are explicitly written in the pasuk. So you said, very interestingly, there's other avos that are not.
That's the
mashmut you want to say. That's the inference you want to make.
Right. I mean, otherwise, well, I guess I don't understand it otherwise. I mean, if there's other avos that are also dixivan bekra behedya, then what is he telling us?
Actually, that was very interesting. I've done this Rashi many times, and it's a very nice fish the way you're talking. Avos kori lahanach. Why are these called avos because they are explicitly stated in the Torah. So you want to say there's other ones that are not explicitly stated.
That's my surface inference, I guess.
Mm-hmm. But maybe we can read it as these are called avos because they are specifically written in the Torah. If they weren't specifically written in the Torah, then it wouldn't be called avos.
Then there wouldn't be an avos. So you're saying he's defining avos. Mm-hmm. That an av is something which is specifically written in the Torah.
Right. And if it's not specifically written in the Torah, then it can't be an av. So I'm learning the dalet as a because.
Okay,
and you're
so
learning it. You're learning this as a miut, right? As a limitation. You're saying, well, these ones happen to be avos because they're written in the Torah.
So
I have other ones.
Okay, so that's because I'm not so familiar with the Torah to know that there's other avs written in the Torah or not.
Okay, I mean, so anyway, the reality is That's a very interesting reading. Okay, again, the reality is that there aren't any avs that are not written in the Torah. Can I just grab that 1 second? My wife just left, so I'll be right back. Okay, that was interesting. Seder. I'm trying to think also because I have, of course, a little more knowledge here on what's going on. I was just wondering if. No, okay. Anyway, that's a simple pashat, exactly, which is that he's giving the reason why these things are called avos, and the duh means the reason they're called avos is because they're written clearly. And anything, and the inference would be anything that's not written clearly, i.e., it has to be derived, then you would call tolda. Okay. Okay. The Seder. Now the second point he has here is that the Gemara is maforish haini toldos. The Gemara is going to explain to us which are the toldos. Now you see that Rashi's bothered with a problem here. Why does he have to talk about the toldos and tell us that the Gemara is going to explain them? Because
the Mishnah doesn't mention them.
Exactly. The Mishnah does not mention them. It tells us they're for avos, and avos is a term that's generative, and it doesn't tell us about them. Well, what are they exactly? We're not, so he's going to say this is a question that the Gemara is going to ask. Now that's another thing Rashi often does, is tell you about, again, this is a lack of consistency, because it's called being incomplete, right? If you tell me there's avos and you are already telling me the toldos, and they're not here. So that's going to be a Torah Shabbat Peh that we're going to learn about later on in the Gemara. Okay, so that's a kasha, really, right? That's really nishmami. That's a kasha you should have. The kasha is, where are the toldos, right? And the answer is, toldos are not going to be in the Mishnah. It's going to be in the Gemara. Yeah, please.
So I don't understand why it's a kasha. I don't understand why, if the Mishnah doesn't mention toldos, that's a kasha on the Mishnah.
Well,
Why would we
because,
why would we expect the Mishnah told us?
well, if you tell me that a person is a father, then for completeness, I should find out who children are, shouldn't I? Or is it just good enough to say he's a father? That's one possibility. Or the other possibility is, again, we're just talking these things out, is that, well, what exactly are the toldos? I mean, it's not so clear the generative principle that's going to be derived here, even if you don't know what they are, but still, in other words, even if you know that they do exist, but the operant principle that would create them, you definitely don't see from here. So even if it's not a question of the Mishnah, it does, in a certain sense, it has, even if it should have, either it should have been written in the Mishnah, or we should have some indication of how to produce them. Which is, at that point, it wouldn't be a question of the Mishnah. It's just a question of how do you understand what the avos are. Again, maybe it's a question of being satum, as Rashi said. On what basis do you create an older from these things? Okay. What's the factor that produces it? So he's going to tell you that the toldos that are going to be generative are going to be explained, and you're going to understand those factors. So either it's because I just said simply that as far as completeness, if you bring up a relative term, then you should explain both sides of it. I mean, that just you bring up a term that you tell me this A is big, A is bigger. And you don't tell me what it's bigger than, so what good is it A is bigger? So you tell me this is an ob, that's very nice. But then you should be telling me, well, what is the toldos? I mean, that's an actual question that should be raised, I think. Or the second way around is nishmami peri, is that there's too many possibilities. That's the second way I learned it. Okay. But again, we're talking it out. What we do here, in another method, by the way, which is very, very important to realize, is that you first have to read the text yourself and form the concept on your own. After you form the concept, then you have to read other people who are more expert than you, and to see if they agree or disagree with your hypothesis. Okay, it sounds very good here, but if you know other Gemaras, you can't say that explanation. Okay, but what I'm trying to bring out here is very, very important to learn. But another thing, these are things that people don't do. That's why I dwell on them. People have a tendency just to read the Mishnah and the Rashi and the Tosfos and just read everybody. But they're not aware of the issues at stake. So the way you become aware of the issues is to first read the text and give your own understanding of what it means. Then you read, you say, well, did he agree with my understanding or did he disagree with my understanding? Okay, and why did he talk about something that I wouldn't have even thought was a problem? Okay, so that's how you become educated and more sensitive to what they're talking about. But if you never really go through the process of saying, well, what is the simple meaning of what's being said? So then I don't know if Rashi is coming to answer a difficulty or to say a dochek in the text, right? If I say, for instance, that Hashem put his hands Rayim, and someone tells me that it's a mashal, so good, I read it's a mashal. But if I don't understand that there was a simple way of reading the text, that it's not a mashal, I mean, in other words, the simple words don't indicate that. So then I don't understand how this text now is being pushed into a secondary meaning called metaphor. Okay, and these things are very, very important because maybe other people will say it's not a metaphor, But so I have to be consciously aware of every one of the moves. I make an analogy all the time between a spider web. Changing one of the threads in the web readjusts the other webs. So any of these minor changes, which if overlooked, can be very significant because someone will say, wait a minute, I disagree with that movement, there's another movement. So, but that's all involved in plummeting the real depth of the text, not just simply just reading the words and getting a fuzzy idea. Okay, all right. Let me get rid of this pop-up things that are coming up, if you don't mind. Another thing is just disturbing. Okay, good. Now here's a very significant Rashi. I mean, something that we can also appreciate here, and it's going to be a big fight with Tosfos, and an opening to a lot of. Why does that keep happening to me? Just 1 second. I'm trying to get rid of all these things. I thought I got rid of it. Okay. And now there's another way to get rid. Say goodbye to that program. Goodbye. Very nice. Okay. Let's look at this Rashi, okay? Shor Vabor.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Please go. You read.
Okay. Okay. Keseder shehen kesuvin beparsha sidran b'mishnah.
Stop.
Parsha
So,
Rishon.
okay. Now what I like to
Okay.
do, this is me, you know, since we have this digital stuff, I just, you know, like to put that break in there. Kesedish and Kesuvin Baparsha. Go ahead.
All right.
Translate
So the
that.
order in which they are written in the parsha is the order of the Mishnah.
What does that mean?
Well, that the order that we see here, I mean, they say he's saying it the opposite first, but I mean, the order that we see them here in our Mishnah, Rashi is telling us that's the order that they appear in the Chumash, and therefore that's the order given in our Mishnah.
Right. Now you have to say, well, what's bothering Rashi? Okay.
Well, first of all, he's not happy with the order that's written in our Mishnah because I guess for one thing, when it says Shor Bor Mava Hever, they don't seem to be appearing in a logical order. So since they don't, you know, for example, Shor is moves, Bor is stationary, Mava moves, you know, fire moves. So he's got just on that level right there. There's a number of other inconsistencies as well, but it doesn't seem to comport to any order that makes sense to us.
Right.
So Rashi says that, well, no, we're not talking about logical sense here, logical order. We're talking about the order they appear in the Chumash.
Right. So there's Rashi sensitive to the fact that there's a shinui of seder here. The order is changed in such a way that there's no common thread to define the relationship of these four items, right? And therefore he has to tell you that there must be some other basis. There can't be there's no logical basis here. By the way, I mentioned to you, I think that I've seen just through my view of how the Mishnah works in the Gemara is that they like to go from the top down. So when we're going to talk about the three toldos of Karen, for instance, they say there's three avs in a shore. It's Karen, Shane, and Regal, and not the toldos. There's three avs in a shore. There's actually three pesukim that talk about a shore, and they describe it as Karen, Shane, and Regal. So that goes from the head, the horns, to the mouth, and then to the feet. Okay, so that's a logical progression that I've seen a lot of times when they're writing a list, and all things else being, everything else being equal, so they like to go from the top down. But here, as we said, there's no way we can figure out a logical progression. The other problem is, it's even worse, is that there's a contradiction between the logical progression, or I shouldn't say logical, the progression here, and as you said, with the analysis, right? The analysis said that the shore is not like the Mav, and the Mav is not like the shore. So that's number one. If we give it numbers, that'd be point number one, point number three. It should have said the shore is not like the bore, and the bore is not like the ma, but then we could have said at least, we could explain this presentation in this first phrase as using the order of analysis in the next phrase, right? That could have been consistency,
Right.
even though, but here it doesn't even that. So it doesn't follow any external logical order, and it doesn't follow the order that it's going of the presentation in the next line. So it's totally, as I said, satum. It's closed. Why the Mishnah would pick this strange combination of avos? Okay, and Rashi's answer is, well, first of all, he explains what the answer is. Yeah, the answer is that the Mishnah is following the order of presentation in the Chumash. Okay, so now we do see that happen. Although the Mishnah, I must say, is usually it's usually the Seder of the Mishnah is usually subject-oriented. Like, for instance, the Mishnahs, if you want to know how to remember this, Mishnah says Zman Nakat. You start with Zeroyim, and then Moed, and Nezikin, and then Hashim. There's a certain progression of concept over there. What it is, how it works, we have to speak about. But the Mishnah likes to talk conceptually. Like here, there's 4 avos. It's a conceptual problem that we're going to have here, which is, why do I need 4 avos? The conceptual problem that the Mishnah is handling. However, the Mishnah also likes to show that it is a second in command. Mishnah Lamelech means it's the second in command, and it's a commentary on the Chumash. So it will sometimes, as in this case, says Rashi, that it will go against the logical progression in order to say, well, remember something. We're just commenting on what's written there in the Chumash itself. And therefore, I'm going to give kavod, so to speak, to the Chumash. Now, that's a dochek answer, because normally we think of the Mishnah as a conceptual analysis, and the progression should be a logical progression, but that's what Rashi came up with. Other people may disagree with it, but that's his explanation. Okay, so it says shor bor. That's what he says. Now he spells it out, and look what he says here. The Parsha Rishona, go ahead, read.
Oh, the Parsha Rishona, Nemra, B'shor Shniya Babor.
No, actually, I should have just done it like that. Parsha Rishona is Nemar B'shor, and the Shniya is Babor.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is some of the stuff that you got into over here, right?
Yeah.
It happens to be true what Rashi says, that the Torah does talk about the shore and then afterwards the bore, but it's not as simple as it's made out, and that's that whole Tosfos over there. And also, what about Parsha Shlishi and Revi'i? That's also what the Tosfos talks about. How come Rashi only stopped with 1 and 2? What about 3 and 4? Shouldn't that also follow? And when we get into involvement with that Tosfos, you'll see that they don't follow the order. So that causes a whole understanding. Why should the Mishnah only start with the first 2 and then all of a sudden switch? So we're not going to get into that again, because we're just opening up the Rashi. But the iyun means that we have to now look at the Chumash itself. We have to look at all the Pesukim. We have to find which pasuk talks about shor, bor, mava, and heather. And then we have to see if it's really true that the first parsha is about shor and the second one is about bor, and then what happens with 3 and 4. And the other work we have to do is, since we know that there's a machlokus between Rav and Shmuel about what mava is, and that impacts on what shor is, we're going to have to see if that works consistently with both those shittas. So all that work is iyun work that's done at the next level of analysis, and that's what Tosfos is all involved with. But we're going to first just do an overview of Rashi, and then we'll pick the Tosfos that you want to, discuss. Okay? Because, like I said, everything here is quite deep. Okay, Beseda. This next Rashi is Mava.
Okay, so this is Meforish B'Gemora. So he's telling us that, first of all, he needs to speak because Mav is a word that we don't know what it means.
It's Satum, right? We said it's Satum. It's right.
Yes, Satum. And so rather than getting into it himself, he just tells you that it's coming up.
Right, because the Gemara actually is going to discuss that issue very intensively and extensively. Okay, because so he's going to say, but he always flags the problem for you, and then he says, okay, this is a problem. What the word is, it's not simple, and we want to have to wait to the deeper analysis of the Gemara. Okay, but here, look what he says in the word hever.
So he says ki tetza eish, and so he's telling us that hever means fire that spreads or goes out, and so several things here I'd say is that one is that maybe eish that doesn't go out is not hever. There's very controlled, tame eish, and then also it's in reference to the pasuk where it says ki tetza eish, the word hever is used three times there,
right,
in different forms.
Right.
So,
right. So simply speaking, however, it is just bringing a reference to the pasuk. Okay, I don't know if you can make the diuk you said. If it doesn't go out, okay. Also, doesn't seem to be any machlokus about this word. Okay, so he doesn't have to tell you. This word definitely means eish, and there is a problem because the physical word really means to consume.
Right.
And we have the word, it says bir b'stei acher also. It's not so simple. It says in Regel, where an animal goes out and consumes another field. So to consume something could mean to eat it or to destroy it, destroy it completely. Okay, so it's not so simple again, but simply speaking, here everyone's going to admit that this hever is eish, and we, as he said, Rashi did not say it, but it has to mean eish according to the logic that we have. Lo zevzesh darkan leileka sheyesh ruachayim kaharia eish she'ein ruachayim. So that it can't be bore. That's definitely it can't be. No reason to have two bores. So it really, if two possibilities must only be eish. And we had a question which Rashi does not address here: is why is there shinui lashon? Rashi doesn't address it. Okay, let's read this next Rashi and see what he has to say.
Okay, so lo hari shur kahari hamava, klomar, ikas of rachmana shor, lo nafik mava menei. So if the pasuk would have only written shore, then we wouldn't have been able to derive mava from it. So, I guess the presumption here is that if you own something and it causes damage, you're liable for it. So what difference does it make? Or not own something, but if you are somehow responsible for causing damage, why do we need to be told different aspects of that? You would have thought that you'd be liable for anything you did to cause damage. So, Amtu Lachachi, and the reason
I
it
think
says it here.
it says because of this, Amtulahi. Because of what I just said.
Itzrahu lemiktav. It's needed to write it down. Because we couldn't derive one from the other, then we needed to write down, both of them.
Right. Right.
Shor and Mava.
Right. Right. Because one could not be a derivative of the other. Now, there's a key word here called kolomar that you should know about, by the way. Kolomar is always a sign of what we call a perish dochok. This is when Rashi is giving a dochok explanation. Now, for us who don't know anything about how the Torah works, so we're happy to hear anything from Rashi. But the deeper level of the message here, what she's saying is, I am now going to tell you what's called a perish dochok. What I'm going to tell you, the meaning of this text is not what's normally the way that the Gemara normally works. Now, of course, all the things that I'm saying because I know Tosfos. But the rule is the rule. Whenever you see kolomar, Rashi's always giving a perish dochok, meaning he's not explaining the simple meaning of the words. Okay? Now, why it's not simple, we'll talk a little about that, but that's always a key word to say, wait a minute. This interpretation I'm going to give now is not the simple meaning of what you're reading here. Okay? Now, it turns out, and that's this Tosafos you were referring to, that there's different ways of deriving cases from the Torah. Okay, so one is if it says so, or there's an analogy, and this unstated case is equivalent to the stated case. Then there's another thing called a kal v'chomer, which is that our case is even more strict than the stated case in the Chumash. So if there's a chomer in the light case, so certainly our case should be chayev. And then there's another mechanism called hatzara shava, where you could learn a third case from two cases. Okay, and the Torah is telling you that by the fact that the Torah writes these two cases, it's not the chumras in both that generate the rule, but the common quality between the two cases that generate the rule. Okay, I realize I'm saying very, very heavy type rules very quickly, but the only reason I'm saying it is because we're going to see that this statement, lo hari ashor kahari amava, lo hari mara kahari ashor, is usually used to say that the unique factors in two different cases are not generating the law here. It's the common quality between the two. That's how the lo hari is, the language is commonly used. It's to eliminate chumras on two cases so that I can get to an LCD. You with me on that? I can give you examples. I mean, maybe I'll have to give you examples, and maybe Tosfos won't have to talk about it. But for instance, I'll just say it again. Let's say I have two cases in the Torah, correct? Right? So I don't know, like in these cases we're talking about, I don't know why the Torah says it's law. Is it because there's a chumrah in each one of these cases which would generate the law? Or is it because of the common quality between the two cases that the law would be generated? Now, if I say the second one, that means the two cases are written. If I say it's the common quality, that means the reason why the two cases were written was purposely to eliminate the uniqueness of the din, and to say, don't think the din is coming from this chumrah, don't think the din is coming from that chumrah, the din is coming from a commonality between the two. That's how that system works. That's how normally Harizeh works. It means that when you see two pasukim and you see the same law, so you might want to say, well, A has the law because of a certain chumrah, and B has the law because because of a certain chumrah. So when that situation is presented, the Gemara will say no. The reason why I repeated the law is to eliminate the unique factors and to come to an LCD. Okay, now I have to explain that much more in much more length. All I want to say here, the word kolomar means that this statement, lo hari ashoka hari amava, is not being used in the standard way. How is it being used? Not to eliminate. When we get into Tosfos, we'll go more extensively into it, because it's it requires a subtle understanding of how things are done. But simply I want to show that Kolomar says that this statement, lo hari ashoka hari mav, is not being used in the traditional way. What it is saying is that given sure I will not know mava. It is not trying to say that because we have shor and mava, I'm going to come to a commonality called, for instance, ruach chayim, that's going to cause the law. These two cases, again, shor and mava, were not repeated to tell me that there's a lower LCD between them. For instance, Baal Chayim, that's going to generate the principle of paying, and now I'll know all Baal Chayims do it. It's not specific. It's not specifically the Gora or the Trembler, for instance. That's how normally lo hari. So he's saying, Rashi's saying it's not what's going on here. What's going on here is, given shore, I could not derive mava. Now,
well, but that's, if they're operating by chumras, if it's coming to show that they're not being operated by chumras, and so that the chumrah of shore is not going to eliminate mava because we're not operating by chumras, and that's the traditional way it's working, then, and this is, or that's the way it would traditionally work, would be to eliminate the chumras. And then you went on to say, however, here it's saying, if I knew shore, I wouldn't know mava. You still haven't said why that wouldn't just be eliminating the chumrah.
Because when you eliminate chumras, what you're saying, you have two written cases and the chumras are being eliminated. Here our problem is that if I only had one case, could I generate the second one? It's a different question being discussed here. The question here is not that I have two cases written and I want to eliminate the chumras and go to an LCD. That's not what the statement is coming to tell us. The statement is coming to tell us that if I only had one written, not two, then I could not derive the second one from it.
All right, I'm compressing that in a way that I'm not quite sure how I'm compressing it, but it would just, to me, they sound like similar statements. For example, if I only knew shore, I wouldn't know mava. That's you say, the untraditional way of using this lohari. But the reason that I wouldn't know mave if I only knew shore is because I would have thought that it's the chumrah which is making shore chayav, and since I would have thought that it's the chumrah that's making shore chayav, I wouldn't have learned mava because mava doesn't have that chumrah.
Correct.
So to my mind, that's an equivalent statement to saying these cases aren't being aren't operating on the basis of their chumras. They're operating on the basis of a commonality.
Actually, it's just the opposite from what you just said now. If the Torah had written shore, the Mishnah is trying to tell us that the conclusion would be since mava doesn't have that chumrah of shor, so then it would be putter.
Right.
That's not
Right. Exactly.
eliminating the chumrah in shor at all. It's establishing the chumrah in shor. It's not, the function of mava here, the function of talking about mava here is not to eliminate the chumrah of shor. It's to say that that chumrah would, if mava was not written, eliminate mava. The specific chumrah in shor would eliminate mava. In other words, we're not trying to eliminate the factor of shor. We're trying to show why mava cannot be derived once we have that chumrah in shor. Given the chumrah in shor, mava cannot be derived. That's the message here.
Okay, I understood what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm confused about the first part, which is if lo hari is traditionally used to eliminate the chumras and show that there's a commonality, how would we have learned what's being said here looking at it in the traditional usage of that phrase? We would have said, the phrase would be coming to tell us when it says, we have our Mishnah, it says the four avos are shor, bor, mav, and hever. Then it says lo hari, shor, gahari, and mava, which would be traditionally telling us shor and mava are comparable because of their, we learn them both not because of their chumras, but because of their common factor, which here would be ruach chaim.
Yeah, but to do that, you're right on track. But to do that, we have to now learn both the phrases simultaneously. We have to say lo hari shor kahar mava and lo hari mava kahar shor. To do what you just said, in other words, when you start with the premise that both of them are written in the Torah, they're both written in the Torah, both the shor and the mava, and then you're trying to explain to me that each one will eliminate the chumrah in the other. So then you have to run both of them together. You have to say, since mava and shor are both written, given shor, I would have, given shor, I would say the chumrah is generating the din. But once I have mava in the chumash, it does exist. We're talking about when they both exist. That chumrah is eliminated by mava, and the mava written in the chumash eliminates the factor that shor has to be generating the din. So the presence of both of them, is the thing that eliminates the chumras generating the din. It's the presence of both of them. Are you with me? So then you might want to read the Mishnah as lo hari shor kahar mava lo mare hari kashor, ella, what's being produced, the sada shava of ruach chaim. That's how you want to read. But that's Rashi saying that may be the traditional way of using the phrase lo hari, but that's not the message here. The message here is not if both of them are written, it would eliminate the chumras. It's to tell you if only one was written, it's to tell you why do I need the second one being written? Let me just learn it from the first. And the answer is I can't. So it's trying to tell me that there's a chumrah in shor that would prevent me learning mava. It's not trying to eliminate the chumrah of shor by mava. It's trying to show me that I can't learn mava given the chumrah of shor. It's a different message. It's very subtle, but I mean that's the okay.
Okay. So then, looking at it as used traditionally, the lo hari, shor kahari mava, how would you translate it?
First
what
of
do the
all,
words mean?
Okay. First of all, I would not put a period after lo hari shor kahari mava. I would have it as one statement, lo hari shor kahari mava and lo hari mava kahari shor. Okay, which would mean since shor and mava are written, then I see that the chumrah of shor is eliminated by mava, and I see the chumrah of mava is eliminated by shor, and therefore, since I have both of them written, they are in effect eliminating both chumras and forcing me into an LCD. That's how I would read it.
That's the explanation of what it means, but how do you get that from the words?
Well,
Is it
simple.
like a totally idiomatic, or?
Well, stylistically, first of all, that's how stylistically this format is used when you have two pasukim and the chumras are being eliminated by each of the other written set. That's stylistically how this system is used. Okay? In other words, in style, if I were to say this is consistent with the style of this, put it the standard style, I would say lo hashor karamava lo mave kashor is trying to eliminate the chumras in shor and mava and to force me to come to an LCD. That's how I would read it. Rashi says stop, that's not what's going on here. We have actually two independent statements here. They're not working in tandem to eliminate each other's chumrah. They're actually two independent statements which are telling why the second one has to be written. In other words, the second one has to be written. The second one, it's not that the second one is written to eliminate the chumrah in the first. It's telling me that the second one must be written because there's no way to derive it from the first.
Right.
That means the chumrah in the first is preventing me from deriving the second one.
Right.
Not that the second one is eliminating the chumrah in the first.
Uh-huh.
It's a different system. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Now, why does Rashi have to say that? Blah, blah. It's a whole deeper point. But this is a very subtle Rashi here. And all comes from understanding, number one, this word kolomar. Whenever Rashi says kolomar, it means to say, what do you mean it means to say? Well, of course you don't understand what it means at all. Or it means to say this and not what is traditionally meant by this type of language. Okay, so that's what the kolomar is a sign. It's a sign of what we learned here is called a perish dachok. Rashi is now going to give a pushed-in explanation to this line. Lo hari zek hari zek. Why is it pushed in? Because again, it doesn't follow the standard. There's a shinui here. There's a change from the standard. Okay, but again, you have to know what the standard is. But the standard normally is that when you have two pasukim, two cases written in the Chumash, they eliminate, they force you, which have an LCD, then they're forcing you to say that the Chumras are not generating the din, it's the LCD. That's not the message here, Rashi says. Here the message is only to tell you that given, in other words, why did the Torah have to write the second one? It's not that the Torah wrote both and what's the message. It's why did the Torah have to write the second one? That's the problem here. It seems unnecessary to write the second one because I could have learned it from the first. That's the message here. As opposed to, I know the Torah wrote both, and why did it write both? To eliminate the chumras and to tell me the LCD is generating the din. That's not what's being done here, even though the language is normally used to express that concept.
So how does that tie into Shtei Psukim Habayim Kiyachad Ein Melamdim? Because if they got two cases here that are equal and they're brought together, and you say, well, we can't learn from them to generate other similar cases, we would limit it to those two. Is that
Yes,
a problem here?
Not the problem. That's exactly what's being discussed here. Since the second word in this Mishnah is the word abos, it means that all four of these avos are generative, right? Now, if it were true that I could learn one from the other, then I could not use the generative principle, because the rule is shnei pesukim b'ayim k'acharein melamdim. When two things tell me the exact same thing, and in other words, I could learn one from the other, the second one's extraneous, it puts a stop on generative on the generative rule. Okay, so the Mishnah has to tell us here that if I had one, I could not learn the other one. So it's on a level one, what I would call a level one stage of the problem, which is, we just said avos. Avos means that each one of these things, each one of them generate their own toldos. So the Mishnah is saying, but wait a minute, if it's true that I could learn one from the other, then I can't generate the toldos. So it has to tell me that it's not true that I could learn one from the other. If I had one, I would say the chumrah in the first one would prevent me from learning the second one. That's why I call it a stage one problem. Then it's a stage two problem, which the Mishnah maybe talk about later on. I don't know. We're going to have to analyze that. Well, what happens if I do have two? Can I learn a third one for it? That's a stage two problem, but that's not what the Mishnah is addressing itself to now. Okay? It's not talking about if two were written, could I learn a third one? It's not talking about that. It's talking in stage one. If I had one, could I learn the second? And it better be that I can't, because if I can, then it can't be. You can't tell me there's avos here.
Okay, so then let me ask you, if Rashi hadn't spoken,
right,
and we understood this Mishnah in the traditional sense of the way Lohari is used,
right,
how would we understand the Mishnah up to this point?
Very simple. I would have said the shore is not like the mav, the mav is not like the shore, meaning if both of them were written, I would say that the chumras don't generate the jinn. What generates the din? The tzad shava, that they're balei chayim. That generates the din. Now, once I had once I had the LCD of balei chayim, I would say, hey, that would eliminate though Aish. That's why I have to write Aish. So the Mishnah, by putting both those statements together, are really telling you a stage two problem. That means if I had, the message of the Mishnah would be, if I had Shor and Maba, I could not learn Aish. But the message is not that if I had Shor, I couldn't learn Maba, and if I had Maba, I couldn't learn Aish. That's what Rashi is saying the real message is, that if I had Shor, I couldn't learn Maba, and if I had Maba, I couldn't learn Aish. But you could read the Mishnah that's not the problem here. The problem is that if I had Shor and Maba, both of them, I would say it's the LCD called Ruach Chaim that's causing the din, because the chumras would be eliminated, and therefore I couldn't learn Aish. And that's really the message, and that's what the Mishnah is talking about, the stage two problem, not the stage one problem. What will be the nafkamina? I have to think a second. Just give me just 1 second, okay? I just have to do one little thing. I'll be right back. Hi, Benjamin. Are you still there?
Yeah.
Oops. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I had to move the heating in the house is in the living room. We have this, so I had to move it from my little office there, which turns into an ice box. So that means that these pieces that are flying all over the place, I trip on and stuff like that until I get used to them. Okay. How does Rashi know that you should know? Just for outside information, because the Gemara is going to ask, what does it mean, Lohari, and give that interpretation. Okay,
Uh,
so it's going to be even the Gemara itself is going to be bothered with this language. Are we talking about eliminating the chumras, or are we talking about why we need two pesukim?
so when the Mishnah says Lo Hari Ashor Kahari Amav Lo Hari Amav Kahari Ashor, and if we understood that in the traditional sense, that it's the Tzad Shava which is generating the din, is that they're Bali Chaim, then when it goes on to say V'lo Zeh V'zeh Sheish Ben Ruach Chaim, wouldn't we have known that if it's the Tzad Shavi of Ruach Chaim that's generating the din, wouldn't we know that you would need to teach Aish because you wouldn't derive it? Why would it have to tell us that?
That's an interesting question. I mean, in other words, what it is telling you is significant. I mean, that would be significant, right? I mean, it would be significant, but I mean, it would be true. It's just you're saying that it would be unnecessary, right? So Adarabba, what you just did was prove. I mean, if you're correct, what you did is prove that it cannot be being used.
Speaking.
Exactly. No, Adarabba, you proved that it can't, in a sense. Well, I know that it can't be talking the traditional way, because if it was talking the traditional way, then it would be obvious that Aish is eliminated. Okay. You're bringing a proof of why it couldn't be talking in the traditional sense, because in the next phrase it would be meaningless.
Oh, right. So then, okay. You can carry this thing to extremes, I guess. I mean, if that's so, then Rashi would not need to speak, because it would be clear that's how it was being used. But then you got to draw the line somewhere.
Now, what do I mean? Because you have to start. You always start with this. You always start with standards. Okay. You always have to start with a standard and say this is violating a rule, right? You don't start with the violation of the rule and ask a kasha. You ask a kasha because what's being said there is going against the simple understanding. Okay. Now, once I start that way, then I'll say, well, then what is the meaning here? Let's go again. Because what did you say? You said we're going to go to like an infinite loop over here, right? We'll just go, because what's the starting point? I mean, let's spell it out again. What did you say? Repeat what you said, okay?
Okay, so what I was saying is that if we know that the Mishnah did not need to teach us below Zeh v'Zeh, based on the fact that Lo Hari Ashor Kahari Mava teaches the Tzad Shaveh already, we don't need the Mishnah to teach us that Aish is required, because it would be obvious if the Tzad Shaveh of Shor and Mava is Ruach Chaim, that we would need to teach Aish. So the fact that it still needs to say that must mean that Lo Hari Ashor Kahari Mava Lo Hari Makar Shor it's not being used in the traditional sense. So I guess, you could have, another possibility would have been that Rashi could have come in, not as he did, but he could have come in and said, no, we need to teach below Zeh v'Zeh, Sheish Ruach Chaim, because Lo Hari Ashor Kahari Mav is not being used in the traditional sense.
I got lost. Okay? I have to go over that slowly.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let's say Rashi doesn't come in on Lo Haria Shorka Haria Mava, but first comes in on Below Zeh V'Zeh, and he says, Lo Zeh V'Zeh Sheyesh Ruach Chaim, Ruach Chaim needed to be taught because Lo Haria Shorka Haria Mava, Lo Haria Mava Kaharia Shor, was not being used in the traditional sense.
Yeah, but that doesn't work out. 1 second. You're going for stage 2 back to stage 1?
Yeah, I guess, well, okay. I mean, sometimes, the Meforshim, particularly Tosfos, will come in and answer, give a teretz to an unstated kasha. So, and I guess, Rashi does that as well. So, anyway, I don't really want to pursue this because it's just, you're right, it's an infinite loop. You have to draw the line, and like you said, the answer is that you have to start from basic principles.
I think so. I think that's the correct answer. I think you have to start with step 1 and decide what's happening in step 1. Once you solve what's happening in step 1, then you will either have or not have a kasha about step 2. But you can't, I don't think you can go from step 2 and go back to step 1 before you decided what step 1 is about. That's what I'm just saying broadly. But again, okay, beseda. Let's, just drop it at that point, okay?
Yeah, all right.
But Rashi does say, okay, kolomar, again, the key word here is kolomar, which means a perish dachuk. Just learned in the Darkei Gemara that Rashi will give a perish dachuk when it's necessary, okay, and to tell you this is a non-standard use is being used here. And what he's saying is the peshat here is not that we're trying to eliminate the chumras on each side by the presence of shor and maveh, but the peshat is that we're trying to explain to you, if I only had one written, why I couldn't learn the other one. And that's what the unique way that Lo Hari is being used here. And therefore, we actually have 2 statements here, not one. It's not Lo Hari Shor Kar Mava, Lo Mava Hari Kashor, 2 statements together eliminating the chumras on each side. It's actually 2 independent statements. Given Shor, I couldn't learn Mava because Shor has a certain chumrah. And given Mava, I couldn't learn Shor because Mava has a certain chumrah. So they're actually 2 different statements why, if I had the affirmation of one, I could not learn the other. Okay? And Rashi says, V'amtu lahachi, and since that's true, that I've only had one, I can learn the other, that's why the other one had to be written. Because of this, Amtu lahachi itzterichu lemichtav, both of them had to be written. I can learn from A from B, and I couldn't learn B from A. Okay, and those are not, also we have to just make a little note here, we won't get into it, because if it's, logically it's not true if I couldn't learn B from A that I couldn't learn A from B, because they're different chumras that are generating, that I would have said are generating the din. So that's why both statements have to be written. There's a certain chumrah that A has that would have prevented me from learning B. There's a different chumrah that B has that would have prevented me from learning A. And since they each have different chumras that force the Torah to write both A and B, because without it, I would have said one of them is patur. Okay, whichever one wasn't written, I would have said is patur. Okay? So let's go a little further, and these are the deep things. And when we get to Tosfos, we'll go back. I always say, we're dealing here with the tip of an iceberg. Okay, but the only way you can also start is by starting, and be consciously aware of what you're doing in the start, and then becoming more and more educated. And that's a lifetime process. It's not so simple. Certain things you're able to encompass the factors are involved, and certain things may take you quite a long time. Okay, but be that as may, that's the Rashi. Now Rashi continues. Ulahachi. Ulahachi, because of this, go ahead.
Well, okay, because of this, the Kanu Beresha,
Nakat means
naked. I just I couldn't see it, the
okay.
letter. Okay, Ulachaki, naked Beresha, Kahari Amava Velo, naked Lahu Kaseder, Lohari Ashur Kahari Habor. So, and so it's because of this, and I'm not sure what this is yet. I guess it's, the fact that, well, anyway, let me just go on a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not given over in the order that it's given above in the Mishnah, which would have been Lohari Shurgari Bor, because we need to eliminate, or we need to establish the chumras of both shor and mava, and we couldn't have done that, I mean, maybe ultimately stylistically, but it would have been more difficult to establish the chumras if we had gone straight from shor to Lohari Ashur Kahari Bor. I think that's what he's saying here.
Normally I would have you from how many thousands of miles away doing this on my machine again. Okay? But
You'd have you do what?
I would have you doing what I'm doing now on your machine. I can give you, I can have you run my machine.
Oh.
And do what I'm doing now. See what I'm doing? I'm just breaking up the statements. We'll get to that. We'll get to that too. I mean, it's quite amazing that.
Okay.
But anyway, we'll keep it simple.
All right.
Okay. So let's go very slow. Let's see what you have to say. Kolomar. That's point number one. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
right.
Point number two. Ulahachi nakat beresha kahari hamave.
All right. So it mentions in the beginning, or first mentions kahari amava, below nekalahu kaseder lohari hashur kahari abor. So it skips over bor to get to mava. Mishum, because to two lo havi matzi lemisne lo zeh v'zeh shish ben ruach chaim. Because further on, or I think that's what to two means, or
Yes.
is it he wouldn't have been able to
further, exactly.
Yeah, you would have been able to teach lo zeh v'zeh sheish ben ruach chaim because bor doesn't have ruach chaim. So he wanted to teach the order he taught it in, Taha bor ein bo ruach chaim. So, I mean, just I guess what he's saying is that rhetorically, I mean, the Mishnah does teach things, with mnemonic hints and stylistic rhetorical devices, which are part and parcel of how the oral Torah was transmitted. And it wouldn't have been able to do this had it used the other order. The chronological order of these things.
Well, what would the world have looked like if it would have said Lo Hari Ashur Kahari Abor? Why would it then be impossible to learn the Lo Zeh V'Zeh, which would mean, let's spell it out, Lo Hari Hashor V'Hari Habor Kahari Ha'esh.
Lo Hari Ashor Kahari Habor.
In other words, let's play the theoretical. Let's play the theoretical opposite. Okay, spell out the theoretical.
Well, you couldn't say that because bor doesn't have ruach chaim. So you couldn't have then further said the next statement in the Mishnah. So, or I mean, I guess, I mean, here's where I get, the reason I started to get a little bit long-winded there is because sure it could have taught it. It just wouldn't have been so neat. Or it couldn't have, it wouldn't have said it so concisely in that order. It would have had to present itself differently. Not that it isn't
Okay, so now the question. So now the question is, though, and what's wrong with that? Why was the Mishnah committed to presenting it this way? If it would have gone the other way, what would have been lost? What would have been lost if it went the other way?
Well, I guess here's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Is he could have come back and picked it up. He could have come back later on and said, Lo hari ashor kahari ha mava, later on. It just wouldn't have been as compact, but still it wouldn't have been repeating itself because there is no repetition. Had it done that, it's just that doing it this way, like I said, is I think is just more stylistically, it's neater.
Well, definitely there's one point that it's more elegant this way. Okay?
Yeah, elegant.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right? But I don't know if that is the only
The other thing is
factor here.
Okay, so if you want to say, well, wait a second, maybe Lo hari ashor kahari abor, if you wanted to say that's not even true.
No, let's say it was true, but what would be the meaning of Lo hari ashor kahari abor and Lo hari abor kahari ashor? What would be the meaning?
Okay, so if we understand the meaning in the sense that Rashi wants to say in the Klomar, it would be that the chumrah of shor prevents us from learning bor, because if we only knew the chumrah in shor, we wouldn't necessarily say bor is chayev, and then vice versa. If we only knew the chumrah in bor, which is it's dangerous from the outset, we wouldn't have known the chumrah we wouldn't have known to make shor chayev, because it's not something which is dangerous from the outset. That's how we would have learned it.
Yeah. So now, why would that have prevented us for the next step? What would we have lost from that? How would we have lost now our mava? Rashi says then we could no longer have learned mava.
Well, I mean, my initial off the top of my head thing is that mava is somehow subsumed in the previous statement of Lo hari ashor kahari abor, because certainly if we couldn't have learned, so we might have thought that since both mava and shor are ruach chaim, that was the chumrah, and then there would have been no necessity to teach mava because we already learned that from shor, I guess.
I'm going to get that phone. I want you to think a little about that. I have to think also. When is the latest you can come? Come in another 15 minutes, okay? Will you come another 15 minutes, 20 minutes? Okay. So we'll work it out. Come in and out. Okay? Okay. You solved it
All
here?
right. So, okay. So, if we had learned Lohari Ashur Kahari Habor, we might have thought that the chumrah of shor was ruach chaim. We wouldn't have been able to learn, or we wouldn't have learned necessarily that the chumrah was kavana or whatever. It would have seemed like, since the obvious difference between shor and bor is ruach chaim, or that's one real obvious difference. Once we've learned that, even though it's not spelled out specifically that ruach chaim is the chumrah of shor, once we had learned that, then it would have been repetitious to teach lo zev v'zeh sheyesh ben ruach chaim, because we already know that. Well, first of all, you couldn't have even said lo zev v'zeh because bor is not zeh. It doesn't have ruach chaim.
So to make a distinction between bor and between mava and bor and compare it to aish, there we would never say that there's a common quality of or both of them don't have ruach chaim.
Right.
So we would lose that factor. Right now we're gaining a factor by saying lo hari ashur kahari mava. We're gaining another factor called ruach chaim. If we jump immediately to bor, then we're going to lose that factor. If we lose lo hari ashur kahari, well, let's write. What would we write afterwards? Lo hari ashur kahari bor, lo hari bor kahari ashur, right? What would we have written left?
Yeah.
What would he have written next in the Mishnah?
Well,
Below zev v'zeh. What would the zev v'zeh be?
Well, it would have been, bor and shor. So you can't really write lo zev v'zeh because they don't have. I mean, what's the tzad hashava between bor and shor?
Right.
It would just be they're both maziks.
That's definitely true. But what I'm asking is, let's play the game. What we have to do is recreate the hypothetical alternative. Right? So what would fill out the blanks? Lo hari ha-shor kahari abor, right?
Yeah.
The lo zev v'zeh, lo not the shore and the bor, kahare ma. What would be the next thing written? In the theoretical world, in a hypothetical world. If it said lo hari ashor kahari abor, v'lo hari bor kahari ashor, v'lo shor v'bor kahari ha.
Well, either have to, by process of elimination, you're going to have to either have aish or mava. And aish doesn't have ruach chaim, and mava, does. And both Mava and Aish are Yelech. They both move to cause damage. So I don't see what you could put in there.
Okay, so let's go slowly here, okay? This is where I like to write out all the possibilities on the chart. I think they're very telling, but it doesn't matter. Let's just do it briefly. If it would have said lo haya shor kahari bor and lo haya bor kahari shor v'lo shnehem kahari ha-maveh, for instance.
All right.
Right? So they definitely could not say v'lo shnehem sheyesh lahem ruach hayim kahari ha-maveh. Nor could they say v'lo shehem hari ruach hayim kahari ha-eish. Right? No matter which one they picked afterwards, because let's say Shor, Bor, Mava, and Hever is in the right order, so they would have picked Mava, they could definitely not have said that the Shor and the Bor have the quality of Ruach Hayim. That would separate it from Mava, for instance, because Mava has the quality. But and Aish, even though it doesn't have the quality, but the point here, Rashi is saying that that would not be a Tzad HaShava. Okay,
right.
So we would lose. What we would lose is the Tzad HaShava of Ruach Hayim by jumping to that, and this way we gained the factor that Ruach Hayim also would be a way to eliminate, for instance, Aish. Because Aish, although it moves, has Ruach Hayim. So it's important to know how Aish should be eliminated if I had Shor and Mav. But if I had Shor and Bor, so then I would lose the factor of Ruach Hayim eliminating Aish. So you tell me what, so let me lose it. So I can't think of that. What's so bad about that? Because maybe Adarabba, then I would probably say Aish would be in. If there's no way to knock Aish out, then it would probably be in. But I don't know if Rashi wants to say that. Anyway, this is a deep Rashi. I cannot say that I understand it completely, but definitely on a very surface level, we can see that if it went immediate, if the Mishnah said lo haya shor kahari ha-bor, it definitely could not make the distinction of Ruach Hayim to separate Aish, right, or Mava off for that. Actually, just Aish. Aish is really the only one. What are we gaining? What are we doing? Aish is the one we're really trying to separate. So you're saying, well, big deal. I can't answer you why it's a big deal, not a big deal. I mean, I have to think that's a deep question.
I mean, the thing of it is, and this is kind of what's been bothering me all along, is that if you change, let's say you change the beginning of the Mishnah to say lo haya shor kahari bor, then once having done that, since you would no longer be able to, write the Mishnah in the same style that you have written it before, you'd have to write it in a different style. So if you were to say lo haya shor kahari bor and lo haya bor kahari shor, the next statement might be v'lo hari ha shor kahari maveh v'lo hari maveh kahari shor.
Okay, so now there you're getting into what you call the economy of words, right? You definitely could compensate, but it would be at a very costly use of language, right? By doing that. So you have to now go back step. You really just have to back step now and clean up what you did, which doesn't make any sense, because if you could have done it in a much easier way in the beginning, so why create an unusual situation and have to clean up the mess? Just say it straight the first way. So so that it's not that it's impossible to recreate the distinction, but it would lead to an overuse of language, which is totally unnecessary. This is the most efficient way to bring out that distinction. Okay, we have to think about it. This is not simple stuff. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, what do you want to say?
I mean, one of the questions you asked last week was, in the permutations and combinations of the Loharis, taking them two at a time, one of the possible combinations of two at a time was Lohari, Shor, Kahari, Abor, in Lohari, Habor, Kahari, Shor. And you asked, well, why didn't they teach that? So if they had taught it Kaseder, they would have taught it because it would have been required. But now they don't teach it because I guess the question is why? Why isn't the next statement in the Mishnah after Lohari Shor Kahari Amava Lohari Mav Kahari Shor, why isn't it Lohari Hashor Kahari Abor, etc.?
Okay, now there's two ways we can answer. One is once I establish the principle here, you're able now to fill out the rest of the table.
Right. Each one has its own individual chumrah.
Right. Now you should be able to generate the whole table. Okay, and just say how Shor is not like Bor, Bor is not like Shor, Shor is not like Mava, Mava is like Shor. We have all the four possibilities. If any one of the four were written and we had any other of the three remaining, so it's not going to work. And so I don't have to spell out. Once I give you the opening move that A is not B, so then I expect you to now generate the whole table. In any of the combinations, given any one of them, I would not be able to learn any of the other ones. Okay.
Right.
Now the problem will become what I call a stage 2 problem, which is what happens if I did write any two of them. Could I generate the third one?
So do you get back into the problem of Shnei Psukim Habayim B'Yachad?
Definitely.
Because you're...
Definitely. If I only needed two of the four to do the job, then 3 would get me into Shnei Psukim Habayim B'Yachad again. So it's got to be that in the twos, in any one of the twos, I have to find a factor that's going to eliminate the one that's left out, the ones left out, or
right. So because we're just dealing with chumras, but what about kulas?
What type of kulas? I mean, if I had A and B, and it would produce an D, which was more chumra than C, then I couldn't learn C out of it. In other words, I know I need, if I have one won't do it because one will never produce the any of the other 3. That'll never work, right? No matter which one I pick, it'll never work. It will never generate the other 3, right? But what happens if the Torah wrote 2 of them? Is it possible, if the Torah wrote 2 of them, to generate the 2 remaining?
Yeah, it is, because you needed to teach 2 of them. They weren't just given without a need, because we needed to teach 2 of them.
But I need to teach 2 of them internally. I needed to teach 2 because if any one I picked would not do the job. That's why I needed 2.
Otherwise,
if I only had one, if I had one, I would say all the other 3 are putter, no matter which combination you give me.
Right.
Right. But now, is it possible that if I had 2, then I could generate 3, the other 2 that are left out? Is that a possibility?
Right.
Now take any one of the 2, and can I generate the 3rd?
Yes.
So this one, if I take this one, and here's a tricky part here. It so happens if I take this one of Shor and Mava, right, then I couldn't generate the third. If I would have taken shore and bore, I probably could have generated the third, which is not very fair. I mean, you know, Tosfos is going to say, well, this is all Yagdil. This is going to be a hard business, what we're doing now. According to this reasoning, let's just say simply, by taking the shore and the mava, that combination of two, it then definitely will mean that I couldn't generate the other two, right? I couldn't. If I take bore and shore, excuse me, if I take shore and bore, I can't generate mava and aish, right? Because no, that's not true. No, again. If I take shore and mava, right? If I take the ones that were taken by the Mishnah, shore and mava,
Yeah.
so then I cannot generate aish or what's the other one left out? Aish or mava.
Hever.
Aish or hever. No, aish is hever, and bore.
Oh.
I can't generate aish and bore, right? Why? Because the shore and the mava have ruach chaim that both the aish and the bore don't have.
Right.
So it's only true that those two, if I picked, I couldn't generate the remaining two.
Right.
That happens to be true. The only problem is that opens up a Pandora's box. So don't talk about those two. Talk about, for instance, bore and shore, and then I could generate the ones that are left over.
Well, that's if you say that bore doesn't have a humra.
Oh.
If bore has a humra,
Good.
then you could not generate the other two.
So very good. This is one of the questions. Now you see. Now hold on. I got to go very slowly here. This is where we have to. This is where we always used to speak a lot when we learn together. When now you have to spell these things out. And only when you spell them out do you get into what's really going on here. There's no other way. If you just read it quickly, it means nothing. Let me ask you something. Are we learning when in the second stage when we say zeh v'zeh, right? Zeh v'zeh. In that stage, am I learning the other two directly from each one or from a combination of the two? In other words, let's spell that out.
From a combination of the two, because the two have the tzad shaveh.
It can't be that I learned one from one, right? Because I already got that in statement one, supposedly. I don't know if that's true. If I say statement one represented all the possibilities, then statement two has to be a tzad shaveh, right? It has to be that if I had two, I couldn't learn the third and the fourth one.
Hello?
Hello, yeah, are you with me on that? Let's say I say statement one tells me that given one, I cannot... Hello? Oop, I lost you? Oh boy, I lost you. Your audio connection has been lost. Attempting to reconnect. Oh boy, I lost you. I lost you, I lost you, I lost you. I lost you. Hello, we lost the connection. I see. Yes, you just knocked me out. You just knocked me out. Please stop. Hello? Are you back again? Did I get you? You kid when I'm doing this. Hello? Yeah, you just killed, just. Hello? Ah, you killed me off. It's terrible what you just did.